call this Altoona City Council work session to order Monday, April 25th, 2022. We'll now have a moment of silent prayer. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll get into our, public comment. We have no public here. So now we'll move on to the first action item, which is economic development and downtown revitalization. And joining us from the Altoona Blair County Development Corporation is Mr. Steve McKnight. Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, can you hear me? And is this slide deck up on each of your computers? Is it up, happening? Oh, okay. All right, good. Well, I'll just make sure the... Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity and the invite to come in and answer some of your questions regarding economic development overall, and I'm sure you have some specific questions, but what I thought I would do is prepare a slide deck presentation which will provide an overview of some of the projects that have happened over the last few years, and I picked the timeline of 2016 to 2022 to date, as you'll see as I walk through some of this, to really capture some of the recent investments during that period of time, and then also I'll take a look at some of the metrics. Move it into the the agenda. Okay. Is that a
Hello?
Hey, Bruce.
Oh.
All right. This is gonna be a little difficult. I apologize. We're got about 350 people for a banquet, so I'm gonna put myself on mute.
Okay. Steve just started his presentation.
Hi, Bruce. So we'll get into some of the priorities that affect both Altoona and Blair County as a whole. Take a look at the projects that are very specific to the city of Altoona, and then talk a little bit about some of the metrics that we're looking at. And I'm going to do this very briefly so we can get to an open Q&A, sort of how some of the metrics are changing, what we're looking at to measure economic growth in the current market climate and moving forward, and then where some of the opportunities I see. So I'm going to move through this pretty quickly so we can get to an open exchange. So the key priorities, again, both for the city and county, and this is reflected in ABCD's strategic plan, and I'm sure you've heard us talk about this in various capacities, various city council meetings, and you all get it in terms of what we need to do. Number one, engage, retain, expand our existing business base. 90+% of all of our economic output comes from our existing businesses, so that's been priority number one. To try to do that, which has been difficult in recent years. So we have to grow what we have. Attract people and talent. This is really, us moving away from this idea of industrial attraction to it's people that make up the businesses, it's people that make the decisions as to where to invest and how to invest. So we really have developed a message that targets the human scale in our efforts. So we need more people to work in our existing businesses, and we need more people to come in and invest. So that's our point two. Number three, adaptive reuse and infill. This is really essential in the city's respect, where there isn't a lot of developable land. So how do you repurpose, reinvent some of the spaces that are there, whether it's a building or a site or a lot? And we all know that we're moving through a lot of different strategies to help us do that. place-based infrastructure. This is all of the types of amenities and infrastructure that makes a place hospitable: sidewalks, trees, green space, civic spaces, parks, those types of things that bring people in, bike paths, pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, critically important to how we present ourselves. And then finally, and probably the most important thing, is the focus on middle market housing. As we know, if you're going to bring people in, they generally need a place to stay. If you don't have the type of housing that matches their market expectations, it's really tough to get them into a long-term relationship with our economy and our community. So middle market housing continues to be a big priority. So quickly, the city downtown projects completed 2016, 2022. Quickly summarizing that, there's been 26 major projects that we would consider that the investment level has been substantial to track and really made a difference in our both tax base and employment retention base. $65 million in total CapEx those 26 projects represent when you total them all up, and $20 million in program finance. So through the public-private partnership, whether that be patient capital programs like our PETA program or the BIOS program, or other innovative loan programs like the city has championed out of the ARPA funds, that represents is captured in that $20 million number. And visuals are always good. So we've all seen these projects over time. It's nice to see them on one slide deck. I could have strung this out over lots of different clicks, but you have them there in front of you, dating back to the Casanave building and the artificial limb building, which presented some commercial opportunities and housing. Pensy Place, the Wyndham Hotel, obviously was a major investment that was a priority for the city in identifying an overnight accommodation space. Clay Cup, great coffee, which I'm just grabbed a cup. Equally so, the Green Bean, which they have their new building across the street that they're working on, Kirk Creations, the Columns, and many of our eateries. To the more significant in terms of capital projects, the Puritan Silk Mill building, which now affords us the opportunity to present to outside investment interests and inside investment interests the fact that we have Class A office space available, which we never had before. And I can get into some of the issues that are sort of changing in that market relative to the pandemic. But back in 2016, 2017, it was not uncommon to get a couple monthly phone calls asking for 35,000 square feet of office space that needs to be ready within 60 days. And that was really one of the drivers in talking with the developers and getting them to jumpstart that project. Things have changed a little bit now, but hopefully the market rebounds and we start to see the scale of those projects again. Levity Brewing, and of course the Grand Palazzo, as we're looking forward then to another phase of the Grand Palazzo in terms of, especially in terms of the tax base change that investment represents, along with the accommodations of the 55 plus, which is a really critical part of our overall landscape. And a few housing projects in there with the Elizabeth Apartments and others on the way. So again, we're hitting in almost all of these projects key parts of our strategic investment plan as we've been working with both the city and the private sector to bring these projects to life. And in development, so looking forward, I guess, and the only caveat is that hopefully things aren't derailed by, again, external market conditions as we're all just sort of yo-yoing through the life at this point. But in development, somewhere in the period of 2022 to 2023, we have 15 projects that are we consider green-lighted projects. So real investment, $45 million plus in CapEx. $6 million of that is in the Altoona Investment Fund, the newly created investment fund. So these dollars are being put to immediate use in real projects to help change that tax base and use those dollars in a way that revolve back in and create a sustainable, more sustainable and expanded tax base. So it's a smart way to invest those dollars. Tax credit programs remain essential. So these projects represent $1.7 million in enterprise zone tax credit potential. And also several projects will benefit from the state and historic tax credits. So tax credits are being used right now as important back-end grants, since there aren't many, and we're not a big fan of those upfront grants because they come with a lot of strings attached. But tax credits is a nice way to incentivize a project and have those awarded on the back end. Once the project's completed and they did what they said they were going to do, they get the benefit of that. And the types of those projects that they represent, 30 to 50 are middle market housing units that are in the pipeline. Mixed-use development, industrial reuse is one project, and food and beverage, and the 190 unit there, that's Jeff Long's phase 2 that we all know about. So, and that's a significant part of the 45 million. So I think his is right now estimated about 30 of that. So we have 15 million above what Jeff Long's significant project would represent. So I'm going to go through some impact measures, and then we can answer some questions here. But I think it's important when we're trying to measure, we're trying to get our heads around, like, are we doing well or aren't we doing well? The big numbers that usually stand out historically are, is your population growing overall, and are you creating X number of jobs? Our population is not growing overall. We know we've been sliding over the last year-over-year period for quite some time. And the job count has been fluctuating, and there's a lot of different reasons for that too. But it's useful to sort of take a look back, and this is for baseline. 1940 was our top population number. We had about 140,000 people, most of whom lived and worked right around the Altoona area because of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was rail-centric, rail-dependent. That's the all eggs in one basket scenario. And we know what happened when the basket tilted. We had an exodus of an employment base as they sought employment elsewhere. So there wasn't an alternative for any of those workers to actually stay or try to hang on. And it created an economic slump that lasted for generations after that. If you look at 2022, at 121,000 folks right now, roughly, give or take, they also are now spread out, right, across a diverse sector of the economy. And I'll show you what that looks like here. But eggs are now spread out, so we're going to have ups and downs in different markets, and those are never good things, but it won't necessarily sink the overall economy, and we can return back and forth through different sectors, and folks can find different opportunities. The Appian closure was one of those examples where you had 297 folks employed there. That closure resulted, as cited, by the pandemic. And fortunately, most, if not all, of those folks found opportunities either through retraining, employment, or self-employment. So there were a lot of different types of opportunities for them at this point in time. So that was the only upside to that experience during the pandemic. So in many respects, it's better to focus on not just the overall numbers, but who's moving in, what is the earning potential, what will they contribute, and how productive will everyone be going forward. So how do we build metrics around that? And so some of the metrics that we're looking at, we like to track, and some of these are works in progress because the data sources aren't as reliable as we'd like them to be, but productivity, which represents a proxy for capital investment, capital expenditures into businesses. We take a look at that. And the plus and the minuses here are a teaser for what you're going to see in terms of what's up and what's down. And if there's a question mark, we're still trying to figure out exactly what's a good data source for that particular point, one that's reliable. Wage growth. This is another one, not just necessarily saying we're going to increase the minimum wage, but rather when labor is short and skills are needed, wages tend to go up. It's a market dynamic, and so that promotes productivity. It also puts more spending power in people's hands, and it right sizes, or at least brings in alignment what that value of that job should be in the current market space. Some of that's passed on to the consumer, and we know we're all experiencing that right now, but wages are moving up. Labor force participation, another critical one, versus just overall unemployment. How many people are actively participating in our labor market, either through employment or they're searching for employment? If that number is going up, it's a good thing. If the number is going down, it's a bad thing. because it's an indicator for how productive the labor force will be and how sustainable it will be to fuel economic growth going forward. Currently, we're at a negative there, and I'll show you what that looks like. And in terms of worker age population churn, what that means is as folks leave the labor force, so either due to retirement, they're not happy, illness, whatever that may be, that they leave their job, are you replacing that job with a like age cohort, or are you getting younger folks that are coming in to fill a longer term position overall? So we take a look at what's happening within the population juxtaposed to some of the jobs that are available. Are we replacing that? Currently, that looks like it's slightly positive, which is a good move. So even though the population may be changing, the churn inside the current number is bringing new people in with more spending power to hopefully become rooted and contribute to the economy. We're trying to take a look at some metrics for tax base. It's a little bit difficult based on the variabilities year to year on how taxes change, especially real estate taxes and reassessment and such. But we're trying to build some ideas around how can we track that as a good metric. Community wellness and lifestyle, there's a good source to take a look at that, because if you're healthy, you're doing active things. These are generally good things for the economy as opposed to creating a strain on the healthcare system and such. So we want to track that. Sector of diversity is self-explanatory, and I said we're building a good sustainable economic diversity. And then new businesses established, which is a metric that's out there, but it's not captured in a very readily up-to-date way at the state or the federal level. So there's a big lag between how this data is collected, and we're trying to figure out how can we get more real-time information on business death and startups and what that churn looks like. It's a great indicator to tell you sort of, are you starting new businesses, whether they be home-based businesses or something else. So we're working with the state on figuring that out. So I'm going to move through this quickly. Productivity. This is what productivity looks like in Blair County. We're set about 26 out of 67 counties, so we're in the upper third of counties. You can see the trend line there from 2016 and the slide off leading into 2020. And then 2020 was a challenge, as we know. There was no productivity for numbers of months. And I'm waiting for the next capture from the feds to see how 2021 is doing. But I'm sure we're going to see a line going back up as they begin to digest that trend line for Blair County. So this is good news. This is also generally good news. The wage pressure is pushing wages up overall across all sectors. You see about a 20% growth in wages from 2016 to 2021. As a percentage, our wages are pretty low, so that doesn't translate into a number you would think of as a big number, but it's moving upward. So more people have spending power, and hopefully that translates into more happiness and productivity and all the good things that we want to see from it. So that's the wage front. Labor force participation. So this is what it looks like right now. Back in 2016, and it's all subject to changes in the overall population. So it's basically the number of people who are either employed or unemployed divided by the total number of your population. That's how you get the labor force participation rate. It's not rocket science, but it is important to sort of track and understand that as your labor force decreases, so as people leave the labor force, that side of the equation is going to change, and then as your population is changing, the divisibility there will also change. But you can see 2016 we were at 49.2%. We're currently at 48%. So we're sliding in the wrong direction when it comes to labor force participation. We need more folks to be engaged in the labor force, either looking for jobs, being willing to work, or obviously gainfully employed, within our labor market. We need to bring people in. We need to keep that churn going, because death won't, it's not going to add up for us right now in terms of our age structure. You can see how far off we are from the U.S. average and the PA average. Overall, the U.S. has a 62% roughly labor force participation in Pennsylvania is roughly running right about the same. So we've got some work to do in increasing the overall labor pool. And job growth. So this is a measure, again, which is useful in a lot of ways, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So since 2016 to date, we've lost 700 jobs overall. So that represents a 1.2% slide against the current job market. A variety of reasons for that. Obviously, the pandemic is one of those that we're trying to sort of slide out, because we were moving at pretty much a 1% or 2% job growth prior to the pandemic. We bottomed out, 7,500 jobs lost, and then we clawed our way back up. Hospitality industry, a lot of businesses rethought how they did business, and they're doing more with less. So between the combination of people stepping out of the labor force and then new ways of doing business more efficiently, you end up struggling on the job count overall. So it's not a great measure, but it doesn't necessarily tell the entire story of how the local businesses are doing and how productive they are. Generally, though, they need more folks. So that's the conundrum. If you see 700 jobs lost, but we need more people, you've got to start trying to figure out what's happening there. You know, why is that overall? And a lot of this is impacted by the retail and the hospitality downturn. So this is an interesting one here. This is the worker age population churn. So we're on the plus side of this. It's a lot of numbers up there, but I've highlighted what this looks like. Now, this is not commuting patterns, okay? These are numbers of absolute people that have either moved in or moved out of Blair County. So it's not your daily commute patterns. And you can see roughly in 1 year, okay, this is just in a 1 year period of time, 5,100 people have moved into Blair County, and 4,900 folks have moved out. So it's interesting that the numbers are kind of tight in that, but we end up with a net positive of 200 folks moving in, which is if I put 200 people in this room right now, it would be a big event, right? And so those folks all have new spending power. They're all doing new things. What's really important about this one is that the highest churn age is highlighted in those two boxes up there. You can see the 6.6, the 8.0, and the 5.1% are all under the age of 24 to 34 years of age on both sides. So it tells us something. You know, if you really want to glean into what may be happening within this group, we know we have folks that move out. We hear about the brain drain. You know, younger folks don't want to stay in the area. But on the other side, people are moving in that age group. And that's due to job opportunities in different sectors. The length of time they stay, I still submit that a lot of this has to do with housing stock. You know, they come in, they try it out, they can't find a place, they get frustrated, and then they leave, and then somebody else moves in to the area. And this can be just outside of the county too. This doesn't necessarily need to be folks moving thousands of miles away, but we have a pretty large population of folks to draw from. So that's the churn that we want to see. That's the idea of not necessarily a top line population number, but what's happening within the population and the makeup of it. This is a quick snapshot of the community wellness. This is a negative right now. We're sort of below the standard, as Mike Tomlin would say. So we have some work to do relative to overall community health and well-being. You know, how folks are exercising, what the strain of the healthcare services look like. So we want to do better on that. And the Blair County Healthy Coalition is one of the groups that really source this information, provide it, and then also advocate for healthy lifestyles. So we have infrastructure in place that's helping to address this. And then I think this is the last data slide, and you've all seen this before, but this is our sector diversity, just how we're spread out as a percentage of jobs at a high level industry sector. So pretty even. We still have a nice concentration in the manufacturing. There is no percentage job growth right in this particular snapshot from March 21 to March 22. But 6,600 jobs are currently in the manufacturing industry, and you can see the churn in some of the other industries as it's represented. So don't get confused by the percentage of job growth there. Look at the number of jobs and where they're concentrated in those sectors to get that sector stability. So finally, last slide, and then we can entertain questions. But these are the tools, opportunities, and challenges in one slide. And we all know about the key tools that are at hand that you all have authored and had the vision to spur on. The Altoona Investment Fund is one. The Altoona City Transformation Act, which was passed a few years ago, which helps with public space improvements for high capital intensive tax changing projects. The Land Bank, absolutely critical tool, which is fueling up now, creating new site and building inventory. And I know Omar's leading some efforts in mapping to, take a look at that. Tax credits, facade loans, those are all bread and butter types of private or public side of the equation that really help spur the private investment. Opportunities for the city, what are we seeing now? It hasn't been all bad as a result of what we're going through at the global level, and we're still realizing it on an almost hourly basis that we need to reshore. We can't continue to have our supply chain choked, our products made someplace else where we have no control over, and if at a whim a major Asian city decides to shut down, there's nothing we can do about it for whatever reason. So there's a real big rethink happening among reshoring and what that means over the next, hopefully, year to 5 to 10 years as companies rethink that, rationalize what they need to do, and bring those operations back stateside. The mobile workforce, it was already booming or at least rising before the pandemic, and now it's accelerated. There's capital available, both locally and nationally, and there's a lot of money that has been sitting on the sidelines overall from the banking industry as well, that they're eager to invest. So right now, capital is king, and you can access it. Locally driven investors, thank God we all have folks that are community-minded in our area that take on projects that are complicated and sometimes don't make the best market sense, but it makes the best community sense. So they're doing those kinds of projects and really inspiring others to do so. So that's important, not just in the city, but Blair County wide. I always point out how many family names we have attached to our bigger employers. It's a unique situation to be in. There's a big small town rethink too that's continuing, and again, a lot of this is spurred by the fact that so many folks fled the cities, went to smaller towns for whatever reason during the pandemic, and said, hey, I can do this. I can take my job, I can bring it here, and many, many more folks now are finding themselves staying in areas like ours. So we're in play. I think, now more than we've ever been. And then startups as well. The startup activity is increasing. All of this sort of links together in terms of why it's an opportunity to start up a business here in a business-friendly environment, good community. The challenges I mentioned in the beginning, the soft post-pandemic office market. You're not seeing these big footprints anymore being consumed. I think you will again, but probably not for the next couple of years until everybody sort of gets their head straight. But you are seeing smaller footprints. So you're seeing more spread out offices. You're seeing co-working space and other kinds of uses of office space as opposed to a consumed, large entity. Another challenge is we know parking capacity and condition. We're all walking through together to figure out how to improve that situation. But it's as more folks come downtown, and we have some areas of the parking that's recently been sidelined, it just magnifies the challenge that we're all trying to figure out. Growing income and education gaps. We have big separations in our community, but that's true with a lot of smaller communities. So you're seeing a broadening of that, especially as a result of the pandemic. Those in the working poor, are struggling to balance it all out, and they're finding it easier sometimes to just walk away and take some of the COVID relief and spend too much time on the sidelines. But there's sometimes no alternative. So it's a really big challenge that we can't solve, but we've got to be aware of it and address it where we can. Health and wellness, as I mentioned, housing and blight, and then national market volatility that we can't necessarily control, but we should follow and be prepared for, whatever happens, whatever bad decisions are made at the global level, we're going to inherit at some level. So we should be aware of that. So that's that. Hopefully that gave you a good snapshot. I mean, these projects would not have been possible if it wasn't for the leadership of the city council members at their various held offices and city planning and zoning and all of those efforts to make things happen. So thank you for your support and time.
So, Steve, I noticed, I'm sure we all did, that a lot of the statistical information that's provided is provided at the metropolitan statistical area, which is Blair County. And I understand it's very difficult to differentiate between, in most cases, between the county and the city. But of course, everybody here is most interested in what's going on in the city. And certainly a big part of your presentation was about activities in the city. But can you, in any way, because you're working at the county level, but also in the city, can you make any distinction between what's happening outside of the city and what's happening inside of the city? Do you think we're taking advantage of the resources available to us in a functional way, compared to maybe the surrounding communities?
I think the short answer is yes. I think that things are moving in the right direction in terms of the recognition of what's working, what's not working, and how to deal with it. I mean, communication is big, and I know the communication right now is the best. I think, I've been in this seat for 6 years, and I've been around a little bit longer, but there's a spirit of cooperation in the city right now that I would say is unprecedented, and that's what's making these things happen. So, when there are problems or if some investors have questions or it doesn't seem right, it's no longer internalized and vetted someplace else. There's a place to go with the new appointment of the city community outreach director, and these are all steps in the right direction to help build that communication, because it's as simple as that. Everybody needs to talk through where some of these issues may arise and how that will work. So, the distinction between the city and the rest of Blair County, we've always said, I know my predecessor, Marty Marasco, would always say, as Altoona goes, so does Blair County. Altoona's the first Altoona Blair County Development Corporation is for a reason, because, we need to make sure that the health and wellness of the city is the best that it can possibly be, because then that trickles out, and vice versa. If it's not going well in the city, the negativity and downturns can creep out into the surrounding municipalities. So, I think everyone's taking the steps to, address the blight, address the resources, and develop that communication channel. So it's really important. The only other thing I'll say is the nature of the city. Just because you're more dense, your lots are smaller, you don't have the luxury of accommodating large tracts of land for, manufacturing or business parks or those kinds of things. But what you do have are vertical business parks now. So that's why I always look at the mill and some people say, well, what's going on with the mill? What's going on with the mill? Our business parks would sit dormant without a tenant for years until one tenant moves in, and then another tenant, and it takes, a long time to build up a business park to full capacity. And some of our parks still have capacity to date, and they've been marketed for 40 years. They're still thriving. But in the city, we have to think of all of our building spaces, vertical business parks, make sure that they're ready to go, they're the best they can be, and begin to ready ourselves for whenever the market, change happens, and we can accommodate.
Steve, thanks for that presentation. Would you be able to speak about the success so far of the Altoona Investment Fund? Could you talk to council a little bit about that so far?
Yeah, well, it was very, one, we appreciate the iterative nature of the communication we did in helping to form that. And so right out of the gate, I think we're at, we have, $2+ million, I think, that's been approved. We have pipeline projects currently that will exceed the $4 million initial limit, take us over that top. And then the next layer that we call likelihood of projects to exceed, which is represented in that total number that I presented of $6 million, we could easily hit 6, and I'm pretty optimistic that we will within the next 6 to 8 months of deploying those resources. The significance of those dollars and the way it's been presented is, and it's very much modeled after the state's BIOS program, which creates this layer of patient capital, and it triggers projects that would not otherwise happen in almost all cases. Now, there may be some projects that would happen regardless, and that's fair. It's eligible projects that will help produce that tax-based return, but there are many others that would not happen if you did not have that stack of capital to incent the project into the next level, or
Right,
at a minimum,
'cause this-
speed it up to market, which is what we want to have happen.
Because this helps when developers are going to banks. If there was a funding gap present, that the banks would not play ball with that project. This gives them added capital to help them get bank financing as well. So just expanding on what you said about projects that wouldn't have happened without this money.
That's right. Or they would have to decrease the scope of the original project, which, again, we'd rather see a more robust project come in that's going to really effectuate the tax base and produce a higher rate of return. And again, that's the major filter that we're looking through all of these projects is how do you create a larger tax base that then you can provide the services. In the case of the ARPA funding, those are services that can be directed to public safety uses or other types of uses that would pertain more to the side of the public health.
Steve, regarding
Dave.
the ACT program, would it be advantageous for us to look at maybe being more inclusive with smaller projects in that?
It's a possibility. I mean, that would be up to you. I think there could be smaller projects that absolutely would benefit from that. I remember the conversation, more than a few years ago, and we were looking at some of the larger projects like we're talking about now in the pipeline. But since that time, you're right. There's been a lot of these smaller projects that could benefit from it. But I mean, that would be up to council.
Okay, thank you.
Was Bruce?
Yeah, sorry about that. I apologize for the background noise. My question is, Steve, is there any change of heart from Norfolk Southern to look at brownfield development?
Yes, I mean, I think there has been a change of heart. In Norfolk Southern, we've met with a few of their newly positioned real estate staff people who are now willing to market the section of their property that's been called the Rose Yards, or it goes back to the Rose Yards. There's a significant amount of acreage there that's available. And especially for an industrial user, I mean, I think that really narrows, just because of the history of the site. These would be primarily an industrial type of user to minimize the amount of remediation that may be needed, on any of those brownfield sites. But we have a solid line of communication. Even within the past few days, we've had some leads that we've linked up with NS. you never know where it's going to go, but it was a lead through the governor's action team at the state level, and we connected those dots. But whether it works out or not, I don't know. But they're there, and that position was not there 2 years ago. So they seem to be in a more aggressive posture about the real estate holdings they have, which is good news.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you.
Any other? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. All right, we'll move on to our next item, blight reduction, and Rebecca Brown.
Steve talked about is the blight reduction. What it is, what we're doing, by the numbers, what we can do legally, and what we can do operationally. Quick definition of blight from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. When a structure exhibits signs of deterioration sufficient to constitute a threat to human health, safety, and public welfare. Removal of blight is critical to the health, safety, and welfare of a community. Neighbors prefer to leave the community than live around blight, as the problems affect the neighborhood quality and decrease property values. Most define blight as an area where buildings are abandoned or in severe disrepair. However, in our city, we experience spot blight, or pockets. In some municipalities, it's easy to visualize one geographic area to determine it to be a blighted neighborhood. There may be many blocks of abandoned or dilapidated structures and unkept property in one concentrated area, and actions and enforcement can be set aside and targeted for that particular area. But in our city, it's reverse. Our blight is what we can be defined as pocket blight or spot blight, and we see this throughout our city. We've seen that no area of our city is immune to the effects blight can bring into our neighborhoods. So what are we doing? A quick overview of some of the tools that we have now. Property Maintenance Code Ordinance. We've always enforced the International Property Maintenance Code through proactive and reactive inspections. We have 5 code enforcement officers, and they're responsible for a little over 20,000 homes. And we also attempt to conduct code enforcement sweeps. Those sweeps were kind of put on hold as COVID approached, and as we went through COVID and the pandemic. Our rental inspection ordinance was adopted in 2002, and an insurance requirement was added in 2018. Our rental inspections are every 3 years, but they're only to meet minimum standards of habitability. We have 5 code enforcement officers, the same, and we have approximately 7,300 rental units in the city. We do provide Blair County with the names of landlords whose rental licenses have been revoked to prevent them from purchasing property at the tax sales. Our vacant property registration ordinance, we began aggressively identifying vacant properties and enforcing registration in 2018, creating a database of vacant properties and also the ability to map those vacant properties. We have a foreclosed property registration ordinance, which requires banks to register those properties. They also must designate a property manager or a preservation company. And our blight determination for demolition. This requires determination by the Altoona City Planning Commission. We primarily use CDBG funding for these demos, and our numbers, as you'll see later, have decreased in the amount of demolitions. This is kind of a quick overview of the process. Once we do receive a complaint or observe a violation, we send a notice, give a date to comply, conduct reinspection dates. If there's no compliance, we can issue fines. At that time, we can also begin nuisance abatement, such as trash removal, boarding up, or mowing services. We issue citations at the magistrate. Hearings are held, and one thing that's actually new within the past 2 years is misdemeanor charges are possible. Our assistant city solicitor was sworn in as an assistant district attorney and has the ability to file misdemeanor charges for code offenders with 2 or more guilty verdicts against them. If all else fails, we will enter the property in the demolition program. Our property maintenance code ordinance, this is a quick snapshot of our inspections and re-inspections over the last 2 years. Our numbers of inspections and re-inspections are over 14,000 last year. Our notices were up, fines, citations were a little lower, and our violations corrected were lower. You'll see from the table that garbage and overgrowth top the violation numbers. Of course, repairs, as much as we'd like them to increase, and we'd like to do more proactive enforcement with repairs, a lot of our responses are due to garbage and overgrowth. The rental inspection ordinance, we did have to decrease our inspections due to COVID. We put a halt on inspections for, I think twice we did that. The inspections went down last year, but the 2 primary violations that we see are carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors. We also see a lot of electrical issues, plumbing issues, accumulations, and faulty furnaces. Our vacant property registration ordinance, we have 200 registered vacant properties right now and 117 notices to actually register the properties as vacant. This is kind of just a quick snapshot of a map that we had Sabrina create that shows pinpoints of every property in the city that's vacant, and it gives you an overview picture from Google of the property. Demolition of blighted properties. This is the numbers from 2018 to actually present. You can see that the number's gone down and kind of remained steady the last several years. Again, this is only something that we like to do as a last resort. And these are some of the properties that we've demolished in the last few years. And again, as you can see, these were really not properties that we could have rehabilitated. These are properties that went through the process, and there was just no coming back from what needed to be done with these. What we can do legally with blight. Act 90. Act 90 allows for permit denial, and we are using that now. So if we have a repeat offender come in and want to pull permits on a different property that they own, we won't allow and issue that permit until the prior code violations are remedied for the other properties. It also allows for, this Act 90 also allows for private asset attachment, but that can be a very costly court process that, in my experience and my research, not many municipalities have used. Of course, eminent domain, it's not used very often. We know what that is. It prohibits the transfer of condemned property to a private enterprise and allows for transfer and control of a condemned property. Of course, the city's land bank that's now operational in the beginning stages and preparations underway to obtain property. The last would be conservatorship. Conservatorship allows a court-appointed third party to take control of a blighted property when an owner is deceased or refuses to comply. It does require court action, and it's also very costly to a municipality. I don't know of many cities that use this. Nearby neighbors and business owners can also initiate a court action for the property, but they must be within 500 feet of the property. What we can do operationally. Probably the most important tool we can have is a property inventory of all of the structures in our city. Cities don't conduct property inventory surveys very often due to the amount of time and personnel that it requires. But without an active property inventory, it's very difficult to have a starting point for blight remediation. So we're essentially chasing problems and blight as it rears its ugly head, otherwise known as reactive code enforcement, instead of having a map in front of us to form a plan of action. The last inventory, I believe, was conducted about 5 or 6 years ago by our planning department, and it was conducted in the low mod areas only, so the entire city wasn't covered. Public engagement. This second tool is a tool we have in the fight against blight. It's people, or our city residents. And I can't stress this enough. It may be an unpopular opinion, but it seems that we've all but lost our neighborhood pride and sense of community. Not in all of our city neighborhoods, but in most. And we see it every day, our department. If you talk to any older resident, they'll reminisce about the neighborhood, and they'll reminisce and, when everyone knew their neighbor, knew their names, their troubles, and everyone offered a helping hand. Neighborhoods now seem like a place to live, or a stopping point, or that house down the street, instead of my neighborhood or my home. Of course, the world has changed, and with social media and Google, many people don't seem to need or even want the personal interaction of the past. But if we want to make our neighborhoods a better place, which includes blight and property deterioration, we need to prioritize authentic engagement among our residents. We can do this by establishing neighborhood groups to encourage public participation, and not just when a dilapidated structure appears or a crime occurs in a vacant property, but all the time. It's essential to reconnect with our community and establish groups in each neighborhood where residents can openly discuss their concerns and ideas with the city to help improve their neighborhoods. The next is incentivize side yard expansion, and actually also encourage vacant lots use by nonprofits. They kind of go together. Demolition of blighted structures, as I said, is primarily conducted with CDBG funding. The lot is not acquired by the city, so a lien is placed on the lot for the cost of the demolition. The liens make purchasing the lot by neighboring property owners unattractive due to the cost. There are several ways to make side yard beautification a reality. Obviously, we could forgive the liens, or develop and adopt a lot or sponsor a lot campaign. This could allow homeowners and nonprofits the ability to adopt and maintain a lot without the burden of ownership. The reuse could be side lot beautification, community gardens, or other green space. And increase or add staff. As I stated previously, right now it does seem like, or it can seem like, we're essentially chasing blight's tail. While we make every effort to curtail blight by identifying issues before they become out of control, with the number of structures in the city, it can be a very difficult task. Between rental inspections and response to property maintenance complaints, we have limited time to conduct sweeps and general proactive assessments of the structures in the city. In fact, we're asked at times why we don't get out of our vehicles, knock on doors, and go up to a resident's property to ask them to abate a violation. In reality, it's just not something we're able to do with our time constraints. Because we're unable to interact with the public in that manner, we're seen as almost a big bad enforcement arm of the city, which can create hostility with residents. People tend to respond in a more proactive and positive manner when they don't feel surprised or angered by receiving a letter in the mail. Circling back to the public engagement tool, the creation of a city neighborhood resource officer or a community liaison to provide interaction with the public or assist with the establishment of some neighborhood groups would be a great tool to assist with these issues. So really, we have a long way to go. As much as we're doing right now, there's still a lot we can do. There's always something to learn, and there's always something that, we're not doing that we could be doing. And, obviously our system isn't perfect, and there's always room for improvement. So I'll take any questions or discussion.
Rebecca, I thought one of the great points of this is the spot blight. Because people sometimes have this vision of, if we could take this handful of blocks or this handful of blocks, but when you walk the city, you realize even areas you think would be the worst will have 4 nice houses, maybe one bad, 5 nice houses, one bad, but one bad apple spoils the bunch, and so one blighted property can adversely impact many. But the spot blight situation is what really creates an issue with us. I know Larry Carter, when he was planning director, he referred to it as measles. There was no one or two areas to like solve the whole problem, and so we've been sort of chasing it one property at a time. One of the things I would like to see, and I don't know if anybody's ever did a study, I would like to know per capita how we line up with the townships in Blair County. I think we would be positively surprised. I think there is a blight issue that goes throughout the county, and I think townships are now starting to catch on board and starting to do some of the remediation efforts that we've been doing. I think there's a lot of positive things that have happened over the last couple dozen years. Like Mayor Hippo's Gateway program, and then I know Mayor Scherf got very involved with building on that. And I believe another positive was going with the home rule charter to create the full-time mayor position. Mayor Pacifico has done a lot of work at the state level. Some of these roles that you mentioned are directly because of some of his work at the state level with the attorneys in Harrisburg, and I think there's some credit there. A lot of times people will ask, how long does it take? Why does it take so long? Because you may have a blighted property and people complain, and it's like, well, why does it take so long to fix it? Well, people have property rights, and those property rights are important, and so there is that process of, okay, what can the government do? Because code officers as government employees can only do so much, and especially if it's a residential privately owned property, these things take a lot of time, and it could be for two reasons. One reason could be the people legitimately can't afford to fix their place. A lot of times it's an elderly person living there that is on a fixed income or something of that nature. The other reason is they can afford it and they're not going to spend the money. A lot of times landlords are the issues. And so some of these rules have helped in that. But appreciate the report, and I really think there have been a lot of positive things happen to help the blight situation in the city, and certainly more on the horizon. And as some of the, like I know Councilman Ellis and Councilman Beatty have gotten very involved in this also, and we all as a team have worked on this. That's one of the things everybody works on when they get here, but good work.
Rebecca, nice work. And
Thank
again,
you.
I've said it to I think all the department heads. I'm just amazed what gets done around here with the lack of people that we have in the city to get things done. But circling back to the inventory of structures, what all does that involve?
So I believe that it's criteria given and provided and offered by HUD. I believe. I know the planning department, they had conducted it the last time that we did it. I don't know what the time was before that, but there's guidelines that they give for if it's vacant, if it needs repairs, what kind of condition it's in, or if the property's all right. Does that sound correct?
Find my button. I wasn't here when they did that. I don't know what criteria they use. I know that a lot of times they use like in the HUD programs, they'll use a Section 8 minimum property standards as a guideline. Now, we were just out in Westmoreland County at a blight remediation summit, and some folks had criteria I think they developed on their own, and they are actually willing to share that information for us, and or with us. So I'm real excited to get in touch with them. It was like Sharon and Erie, and there was another, but they look for different things that code enforcement would look for. Like if you're past that Section 8 minimum property standards, you're looking for missing gas meters, and like the first line of was looking for the obvious, the grass isn't cut, trash is accumulating, and then just going down the line. And they did also talk about working out strategies of working with volunteers. I mean, it's very complex, but an interesting, exciting type of thing that they've been doing in other cities that have very similar attributes, except stronger neighborhoods. For some reason, they still have their stronger neighborhoods. But
Yeah, and another thing, one of the things that they find, and not just what we heard from these cities, but I mean, if you do any kind of research about property surveys or assessments, it really takes a lot of people. And those people aren't necessarily city staff. Some people have recruited, church groups and faith-based organizations and, Kiwanis clubs, people like that, nonprofits to go out and, obviously they'll be given a task list and they'll be able to do that for their community, for the city. Pretty much city residents that know that this is something we need and are willing to volunteer time to do it. I can't imagine right now us being able to do something like that with 20,000 houses. Because like I said, I know right now, I know the last time it was just the low mod areas. It was quite a lot of work even in those areas, but it didn't encompass the entire city.
Okay, the mayor and Ron and I have been working on a project with some nonprofits, and there seems to be a lot of interest in people helping out in these neighborhoods. So I really envision this as something that we could make as part of maybe even the initial step forward to what we're trying to put together here. So if you could do a little research on that and find out
Sure.
how far we want to go with this and what qualifications the people would need to have, I think we can at least target maybe some neighborhoods to get this thing moving.
Sure,
All right.
okay.
In the city of Erie, they used, and the city of Washington, two of those cities who spoke Friday in Westmoreland County. Erie used Gannon University students to
That's what we were
complete
just
their
talking
survey, as well as community groups, nonprofits, service organizations, that type of thing. I don't recall who Washington used.
they used Rotary. I don't know about Washington, but Rotary did a more comprehensive. They were a little more thorough. And I was thinking also maybe something like the leadership classes.
Blair County leadership.
Yeah.
Would be a good, just various organizations that would mention.
Well, and I think for training for college, most college students have to do community service, or you could use possibly like interns, in building construction. So if you could get somebody from Pentac or, that could be an excellent resource. Construction management, those type of projects would be right up their alley. And I think that would look good on a resume, for the young people as well, that they were involved in something like that.
And I know a lot of it is, it's mainly sidewalk assessments. I mean, they're not going to have to go through a house or, traipse through backyards or anything like that or through somebody's properties. But just kind of a sidewalk assessment, I wouldn't think that would require a lot of extensive training to do anything like that. It would just be getting the people and getting the people on the ground to do it.
And if there's we had talked a lot at one point about the neighborhood pride, and I think you're right. I think that there is, especially amongst a lot of the younger people in the city, less of an understanding of where they live in terms of the broader community. But I think that presents this conversation presents an opportunity. If you can engage in some kind of community outreach and actually recruit members, like people who live in that neighborhood to do an assessment in that neighborhood, then they're talking to their neighbors, and then it's not the government coming in or students that nobody knows coming in, or it's people that they know, doing this sidewalk assessment because they want their neighborhood, they want to improve their neighborhood. It's a community outreach. I think that those two discussions can come together in a way that you boost neighborhood pride, and you're also, accomplishing some of the goals that we have for those kind of assessments.
Well, and I think as we discussed, having a way to solve the problems that are outside of the funding capabilities that we have from a volunteer standpoint or from a community outreach, from building and loans to building supplies, all those different aspects. If you can find a solution, and that's what the land bank is hoping to start, is to pick 2 or 3 projects, one to start with, and show people what you can do with a volunteer group or VOTEC people. Because I think the VOTEC is a wonderful opportunity, to teach young people how to fix up a house, because they're going to live in one day. And, that I think has more of a long-term effect from community pride and all those aspects.
How was the inventory conducted 5 years ago? Do we know, like, the history?
I know that it was our demolition staff. I believe there was a staff of 3, and they mapped, they had the low mod area mapped. I don't know offhand how many properties were assessed, but I think I remember there being 4 different groups that the houses would fall into. Whether it was standard, substandard, what type of repairs maybe were needed, or vacant. Actually, and there was also one for just straight demolition. So there might have been 5 groups, but it was conducted by three staff members.
And we still have that.
In-house staff members?
Yes.
Okay.
We still have that study. Mary was saying we have it in our library.
Okay.
So we can pull it and look at it. Because it probably update it, yeah.
Update as opposed to redo. That would be a better use of time.
Mr. Solicitor, Rebecca referred to 2 things that were legal actions, that were costly actions, Act 90 and the conservatorship. I don't know how familiar you are with either one of those, but is that,
Go ahead.
my question is that something that we could, I would imagine they're through state statutes, is that something?
The conservatorship, I remember reviewing that in conjunction, we were looking the eminent domain action with respect to McCrory's building. And Rebecca gave a very good overview of what that is. It's just that you are going to the court and asking them to appoint someone. That person, there's, and I don't remember the exact figures off the top of my head. They get paid for their time, and it's based upon a percentage of the final value of the property, things of that nature, and it requires, there's like timelines, and they're required to come back to the court every so often and report, hey, here's where we're at, here's what we're doing, that sort of thing. So there's a cost and a time factor with that. The Act 90, right off the top of my head, I'm not specifically familiar with that. When you are talking about attaching personal assets, what I can speak to is in a general sense, and if I obtain a judgment against someone, first I got to find out what assets they have. So there's a discovery process to find out, well, what do you have and what's just in your name, and then you have to go through a filing process in the court of common pleas to attach and execute those assets, and which would ultimately result in eventually a sheriff sale. Getting to that step, it's timely. It takes time, and there are costs involved with that type of process.
Okay, I would only ask that if you could look at that and
Sure.
see if there's anything that we could speak with our state representatives about to try to lower the cost or the impact on the cities and defer maybe that cost to the characters we're dealing with, kind of thing. So whatever
Sure.
I'd appreciate your opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the big issues is out of town, and especially out of state
property owners. If we could start dragging them back here for justice, that's going to go a long way in ending that problem. And I know Councilman Ellis has been working on that one too, so very good.
So Rebecca, you reported in your presentation that about 7,300 properties in the city are rentals?
Units, not
or-
properties. I think there's about 3,500 properties, 73 or so hundred units.
Okay, how many properties do we have in the city?
Rentals or structures?
Structures
A
themselves.
little over 20,000.
So about a third of the inventory are rentals, and how much of those of the violators tend to be with rentals?
I'm sorry?
So of the, I guess the violations we're seeing with blight, et cetera, that continue to be carried forward, they tend to be more rental, they tend to be owner-occupied dwellings,
I would say it's about half.
okay?
It's half now,
Yeah.
but the positive thing there is it used to be way skewed to the rental until the rental inspection program and that started. There's about 22,000 properties in the city.
Okay.
Okay.
Because Blair County has 66,000 assessed properties, and so 22,000, and then 20,000 of those have structures on them.
And then we
is how
have the
that
mess of
works.
vacant lots. I mean, the hundreds
Yeah,
of vacant
there's like
lots.
2,000
Yeah.
vacant, yeah.
So you mentioned just now that there's about 3,500 rental
Properties.
properties.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when we're talking about the 20,000 number, it's 3,500 of the 20,000, not 70.
Structures.
Okay, so but that's that's the question. So it's not 7,300 out of the 20,000.
7,300 units,
It's 3,500 out of the 20,000 that would be rental properties.
properties,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you have 5 inspectors to take care of all of the above.
22,000 properties and 7,300 rental
Which
units.
have to be inspected every 3 years.
Yes.
So they're doing about 500 a year, just under 500
Yeah, I don't-
inspections per year.
I think I did,
Just on rentals. I mean, you're
yeah,
not
so
talking
like
about
our
any other-
inspections and re-inspections on structures and vacant lots in 2021 it was over 14,000 inspections and re-inspections in 2021. Our rentals, it was over, 1,356. And inspections, 689 re-inspections. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a big task for
Yeah, so it's,
5.
yeah, that's a lot. I mean, and I think somebody mentioned, how incredible it is that you get the work done with the people that you have.
Yeah.
It's not without struggle.
I know, and I think that's worth noting, and I think that's worth discussing further.
With the fees that are charged for the rental inspections,
Mm-hmm.
does that by any way cover the costs?
It does.
It does,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
The only thing that, and this is something for obviously a later time, that I would like to happen is to have a fee attached to right now, if a rental property is out of compliance, whether it's because of property maintenance, because of they haven't paid their fee, we revoke a license, but there's no fee to get that license reinstated. The time it takes for us to placard the property, to revoke the license, certified mailing, to go out and do our re-inspections, there definitely needs to be some teeth to that revocation in the form of a fee. Especially because we do notify the county anytime a revocation takes place, so they can put them on their list for the future tax sales, to not include those people in their sales, that they're not permitted to buy the properties.
And I think the other thing that would be helpful is looking at, that slide of homes that you tore down. I'm sure it took a very long time for those properties to get in that condition.
Yeah.
And, that is probably worse than the McCurry's building. So, I think looking at a good way to take those properties or get compliance earlier would be helpful. Because the end goal is to keep them from getting here, and we have to tear them down. you know.
Do we know what the course of time was?
Yeah,
for
I mean, I can
property
look
to
at
be-
each one of these properties and tell you exactly what the issue was with
This
each
looks
of
like
the.
This looks
and,
like the Hill District in Pittsburgh.
you know, each one had significant issues getting from where we started, which was, I mean, this didn't happen in 6 months. This
No,
was
it was 20
years
years.
and years in the making that we were, you know, obviously had enforcement action against the property owner. So none of these were overnight. Now, obviously, could we have prevented some of these if we had had more proactive capability? Sure, but it's very difficult for us to have that proactive approach when we're essentially chasing what's out there right now.
Well, that's why I asked the question, is if it paid for itself.
Yes.
So it's not a stretch to add someone at a lower cost if the program's paying for itself. That's where I was going with
Yeah.
that. You know, do we have some more resources to add additional people so that we don't get in this position? Because every time we lost those 6 properties, we may have lost $3,000 a year or plus in rental or in tax base, plus use of water to the water authority, plus fees on cable, that comes back to the city. There's a whole multitude of income that isn't just basically attached to the property that comes to the city. So, and even, we've talked about this also, Rebecca, infilling lots instead of using them for side lots, coming up with a plan of maybe pre-designed structures that can fit on a 25-foot lot. I know years ago IDA did a couple right up from City Hall. They infilled some blocks with new ones, prefabs, and right above KYN, Kathy and I just took a ride and looked at an apartment structure that's up there that was brand new 25 years ago. And, those are the kind of projects that could be used, and those buildings have stayed nice and usable. So,
We actually had our first inquiry for a tiny house placement last week.
Somewhere on the shelf in the planning department is the graphic of the tiny house concept for the 25-foot lot, like the efficiency house unit type of thing, because I remember looking at those about 10 years ago.
and I think that's the one thing, when a house burns down, the story is that you usually use 3. Whenever when one catches on fire, you usually lose one on each side. So, that is a good, or you could put 2 back in there instead of 3.
Do you want to rebut that, Chief, or do you want me to? We're looking at each other because not in Altoona.
Well, the
That's
only
not
reason
what
I
happens
said
here.
that was that fatal that was on Fifth Avenue. I just rode past there today. It was on Fifth Avenue between Kettle and East First, I think. And both those houses on each side sustained a fair amount of damage. So whether they're going to be repaired or not is my question.
Yeah, those are a few examples, but for the most part, we usually have the fire stopped to either side.
Yeah.
However, that being said, they do come up with damage, and the problem is a lot of those places are rental properties. And
So the landlord chooses not to rebuild.
yeah, a lot of times they're from out of town or wherever. It takes time for them to find them, So and a lot of times those properties are uninsured too. That's even a bigger problem. Is that these places are uninsured, and they're not a rental property, so they just
They're just owner occupied.
owner occupied and just don't have insurance. It's almost become a little bit of a epidemic here in the city. The more and more fires we have, we notice that a lot of places are not insured, either with the inside or outside both.
Wow.
So that brings up a question. As part of the rental inspection, do we require them to show proof of insurance?
Yeah, rentals must have insurance. So if something is a rental property, I mean, that's going to be up to the landlord whether they choose to repair a property following a fire or how they choose to repair it, I guess I should say. whether they get a permit or, whether they decide to repair it the correct way or whether they decide to just throw some siding on it or something. Not that we've seen that often, but the vacant registration, we don't require to see insurance on vacant registration, but we do on the rental, the
Should
rental
we?
inspection.
Is that something we should do?
Yeah, that's not something that we have, and I don't know why that wasn't included in vacant and it is in rental. I don't know why that was never included with the adoption of that ordinance.
Well, it sounds to me like that's something we need to look at adding sooner rather than later, because we got to help our firefighters out on that one, definitely.
But as we talked about, Rebecca, and that one property you helped me with on our side of town, when a customer finds out that the repair will be made by their insurance company, it's usually a little bit more palatable. And, insurance helps take people toward repairing as opposed to demolishing. And I think that point's well taken. Should we be looking at having vacant properties who have an owner, be insured? That wouldn't be a bad idea also.
If I could just real briefly bounce back to what we can do operationally slide, you talked about the property inventory, and we've talked about it a lot tonight, but once it's done, an inventory was a snapshot, right? It's of what it looks like right now, and I do wonder what it would be like, or what it would cost, or whether it would be feasible to have somebody in-house whose job it was after it's done to update it, like to keep it updated. I mean, because again, an inventory is only as good as it is recent.
Sure. That's why, if we're looking at something 5 or 6 years ago, it'll give us a starting point. But, it certainly, we'll still have to look at every single one of those properties. But it'll give us a point to go from. But it would be something that, obviously would be ever-changing, and it would need maintained, the data, because, as houses fall by the wayside, or if somebody, as we see, something like what, we looked at in these pictures, or, if somebody decides to improve their home, those are all things that are going to have to be updated. So, yeah. That would take a little bit of time.
Yeah. And then the only other question I had on that side, the vacant lot use, I guess. I have seen in my neighborhood it's not a lot per se. It's I don't even know what you'd call, but it's a would-be community garden, I guess, like a sign up that says, "Please rent me," like no charge, like please plant something here, and it's never been touched. So I wonder, how many of those little spaces do we have?
I wonder, and I don't know. I know that we have, well, what did you say, Councilman Buterbaugh, 200 or 2,000 lots?
About
vacant?
2,000, because if there's 20,000
Right,
structures,
that would be about right. But
22,000, yeah.
really, I would think from the city standpoint, I guess it would help to market those in
Yeah.
some way, not obviously financially, but to adopt a lot or to sponsor a lot.
And again, it's on Coleridge, and it's a small.
I've seen that lot.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's a triangular lot. I
Mhm.
think there's a telephone pole, so it's not huge, and it's not a lot that you'd build a house on or anything like that. But I assume the city mows the grass there, pays to
Yeah.
do that. So, if somebody had actually sponsored it.
And that's the issue that we do have with these vacant lots, because we don't acquire them prior to demolition. We're responsible for the maintenance. So all the grass removal, snow removal, a lot of times falls to Public Works. But we have a contractor that we have through the mow and lean program. So we are responsible for the upkeep, even litter and rubbish removal from the vacant lots. If we could get it into the hands of somebody who wants to do something with the lot in an easier way,
What we found, like we actually did those signs a few years ago, like adopt a spot or and we had a few groups come forward, but the one thing with these groups, like, God love them, like they'll come through and they'll do it for a week or two or a month or two, and then all of a sudden we're chasing them back down. Hey, are you going to take care of this? So we get a lot of that too. So, sometimes it is more of a hindrance than, so if you get a good group, that would be a fantastic thing. But the brownies, the group changes, the mom changes, and then all of a sudden you're left with a bunch of weeds and stuff where you just had a grass lawn before.
Does anybody have anything else for Rebecca? Thank you, Rebecca. We'll move on to our next item, the ARPA update. Is that you, Omar? Or Nate?
So,
So the city manager just asked me briefly to put something together like as an update of where we are in the projects that we currently have in the books for the ARPA money that we're controlling, I guess. But so the slip lining pipes on 17th Street are done. The interceptor down on Kettle Street at Caroline Avenue, that is complete. Margaret Avenue is currently in the final drawing stage. I got it dropped off today, so I have to review that, but that's ready to go to bid by late May. Hopefully award in June. And we'll see what material lead time, so we're hoping, completed by the first quarter of 23. So police headquarters, Eads is going to meet with the chief and his disciples this week, correct? Wednesday. So then we'll get preliminary plans and an estimate set up there, and we'll see what comes back. The third floor or the fourth floor conference room at City Hall is 100% complete. West Whittier Avenue, that stormwater project's been awarded to CH&D, so we're hoping for a third quarter 22 completion there. Walden Avenue stormwater, that's what I refer to as Toy Town Heights. That's currently underway with some water and gas relocations up there to get the stormwater in. So as soon as that's done, we'll go to bid with that. The way it's sliding, we'll see what happens. We're hoping third, fourth quarter 22 or second quarter 23 to have that complete. 17th Avenue Storm Inlet, that's off of 13th Street. That's one of those valley areas up behind City Hall. That was bid with the West Whittier project, so that's a project that'll be done this year. The flooding, let me see where I'm at here. 21st, 23rd Avenue flooding study, that's done. We met with Gwen. We've reiterated that twice, and we're currently going to add some more valleys into that. So they're going to start surveying again with the help of our folks. So we're hoping to get that bid this year and built next year. Blair Rec Memorial court lights, that got pulled off the list for eligibility reasons. The partial payment of the Allegheny Furnace neighborhoods, we're currently getting the plans completed for that. That'll get cleaned up. That hasn't really changed. That's first quarter 23. Pleasant Valley modeling study is all but complete, and we're going to have an upcoming meeting with you all sometime soon on that. North 7th Avenue in Juniata, that was a roadway and drainage reconstruction project. We were hoping to get in with capital paving, but we pulled it out. It's about 90% complete, so we're probably didn't quite fit with the scope with everything else, so we're probably going to bid that as a standalone job third quarter of 22. Public Works facility, as soon as they're done with the police station, we're looking for some 30% plans by mid-June to get that thing moving here, probably third, fourth quarter 22. 22, 23, 24, Public Works stormwater needs an assessment. We rented another vac truck, so our crew that would normally like do the inlets and pipes for the capital paving, I split those folks into two groups, and now they're going around with two vac trucks and kind of a support crew, and we're kind of cataloging. They're out in Garden Heights now, so it's going really well. Guys have iPads. We're getting into GIS, so we're getting a lot of that it was all mapped before, but now we're getting a really good inventory, and the guys, it took a few weeks, but we're really, I'm really proud of what they're doing. It's working out really well for us. The one that we added, it was on here from last year, but we have 2 intersections that we're doing through grants that we've received over the past 2 years. One's by Tom and Joe's, one's by the Cathedral. So that project's going to bid very soon, and it has some stormwater from, it really picks up 13th Avenue between 13th Street and 12th Street. So that'll be going out. I have to meet with the businesses down there and tell them what's going on. We have some short-term detours there while we do the drainage work. So for us, projects in the future, North Branch Avenue and Broad and Beale Avenue, that's going to go from 31st Street the whole way up towards Margaret Avenue, Beale Avenue, Broad Avenue to Beale Avenue, and then tie into the interceptor on 24th Street. That's going to be a pretty big hammer project. That's probably $2 to $3 million job. So we're currently just started design on that. So we're hoping plans developed by first quarter of 23. We're looking at some stuff around 10th Street, 28th, and 6th Street and 28th, just some impoundments before some of these creeks go through the city to see if there's anything we can do to kind of help that situation as the water flows through the city, but not any real updates on that. Garfield Park, walking track, still kind of looking to see if that qualifies based on Treasury. Haven't really looked at that
Nate,
recently.
What do you mean qualifies for what based on Treasury? For ARPA spent, like for ARPA?
Yeah, under one of the not the general categories, but the kind of the sub.
Recreation is
Not
a eligible use for ARPA dollars. And
We'll-
it doesn't
we'll have to look at
specify
that.
what recreation means. I mean,
We'll have to look further into it. I just haven't got there yet.
Hey, that's my dog's favorite exercise track, so it's good now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just there yesterday.
Just don't hit the tree stumps.
Ooh, well.
Where was I? I digress. Geezy Park. You guys all know you're doing a playground up there. The last time I looked at this, Highland did not meet the criteria, but maybe that's changed. I didn't look real far into it. And we were looking at some pipe intakes, and that's a project that's going to be coming online here, I guess, to look at. And then down around First Street, Gwen Dobson has put some plans together, preliminary plans of trying to separate some of the storm sewer and the CSO outfall down there to help kind of eliminate some of that surcharging that's occurring. We've got some issues there, so it's one of the projects we're going to have to go look at in the field and get some further reconnaissance done on. So busy time right now on top of all the other projects that we typically do. Just give a shout out to Victor, Tim, Joe, Rebecca, Bessie, and we're just trying to get this thing pushed out the door. But these things all, Rob Crossman from engineering, he's done a heck of a job. Sam in engineering, these things, like we set a date, the date slides, we pull another one back up. They're just, the review process of this to try to get it done quickly. Rob and I spent half the day at Eads on Friday just kind of reviewing what they have for us, and in-house staff. It's a ton of work, I can tell you, for what we're trying to do to try to kind of be responsible and not just slam something out the door. It doesn't really matter who designs it. They just don't have the intimate knowledge that those in engineering have of the issues that are in certain neighborhoods. So it really takes a full-time person or two to just be a project manager for consultant designs, as well as trying to get the stuff out the door from in-house and dealing with all the complaints. And so, here, if you're letting us know about something, it's going to take some time because we're just really just hammered right now. And it's a good thing, and we're getting a lot of good things done, but we progress. Questions?
I tell people that up front. I met with somebody Friday as you got the email, and just being the messenger, I know you're real busy.
Yeah, everybody is.
Yep.
Thanks.
thank you, Nate.
Mayor, I'd just like to jump in beyond the public works projects and the projects that Nate touched upon. We do have some other categories here. I have not updated the chart, so at our next meeting, our next work session, this will be a continuing thing, so we'll go over that at the next work session.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to city manager updates now, Omar.
We touched upon this earlier when we were talking about blight, but the mayor and I, along with Rebecca and Diana and Mary Johnson, attended it was called a blight summit or blight boot camp at Westmoreland County Community College. I thought it was very valuable. I walked away with a lot more insight into what some other communities are doing to what they call turn blight to bright. I think it may be an overstatement in most cases, but I feel like I have a sense of direction and some resources that we can tap into to put a game plan together to move our city in a direction really it has never quite gone. Rebecca talked a lot about what we're doing now, and frankly, we're doing some things that other places are not. Vacant property registration. There's some places out there that aren't doing that, for example. But at any rate, I just wanted to tell you all that I thought it was a very valuable experience, and we're going to be doing some things in the future that kind of align with what we learned there. We talked about the structural inventory, and I got some insight on what, for example, the city of Erie did in that regard, much bigger city than we are. And also the need for an inventory of resources that are available in the community. Some of the council has talked about that, but I think we really need to inventory those resources and help match people that are in need with those resources. Another business, the city's grant business district revitalization grant program is about to roll out. You passed the guidelines at the last meeting. I've been working with Diana and Bessie, and before the week's out, we're going to be circulating that. I just want to kind of bring you up to speed on that. And also, it's not something that we talk about much, but our finance director, our finance department is going through an audit right now, that's as well as our community development department. That's fairly extensive, and there's multiple auditors on site, and I know it's a lot of work. I've been through it myself, over the years. I just wanted to let you know that we're going through that process, and in a month or two, well, 2 or 3 months, I guess, we'll have a finalized audit.
Is this our city
Yes.
typical audit or
Yes.
state or?
No, this is the Young Oaks Brown Company. Well, it's just for informational purposes. That's all I have right now.
Thanks, Omar. All right, we'll move on to council discussion items. Councilman Kelly, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't, Mayor. Just thank you guys for your indulgence and letting me participate. I know it's been a little hectic, but I have been able to listen, and I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you. We're glad you were able to make it. Councilman Carper.
I don't have anything additional. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Butterbaugh.
Just that I think the neighborhoods in this town tend to ebb and flow, and I think sometimes it's better than it seems with the sense of neighborhood, and I think that's something we can get back. And I know, like with code officer work, they're seeing the worst of the worst every day. It's sort of like how the police officers see the worst of the worst. Like, you're not getting called to neighborhoods where people get along and where there's no blight. And so I thought some of Councilman Carper's comments were spot on there too about finding some of these nonprofits, some of these groups that can help facilitate that. And so, thanks.
Thank you. Councilman Ickus.
Thank you. I think tonight's presentation, particularly on blight, touched on a number of different points. It's taken many years for some of these neighborhoods to kind of get to the condition that they're in, and obviously it's not going to be solved overnight, but I feel confident with some of the strategies that we've talked with here, and I mentioned to the mayor earlier, I think it might be good for a couple members of council to maybe participate or see if there's interest from the development community to see if perhaps we could put our brains together with a group of 3 of us in some facet to meet with them to see if there's something that they feel that we could be doing to help spur or change some of these neighborhoods. But all in all, I really appreciated that presentation tonight, Rebecca, and really good information. Our codes department, it's really impressive the amount of work that they do in a year, especially the inspectors, and I know that they're involved in some situations that definitely less than optimal, but we really appreciate the work that they do. It's not an easy job, and I think it's definitely something that probably this governing body should give some strong consideration to trying to expand those numbers at some point, because it's really incredible the amount of work that does get done with 4 or 5 there in the office. Just maybe for an informational piece here, if there's been any further discussion, were we having an engineering study done on Prospect Pole? I know it was talked about.
Yeah, I actually talked to him before the meeting. He's just finishing it up, so we should have something, I'm saying midweek this week.
Okay.
Which would be the preliminary sort of.
And you're able to parlay that to the city manager, you can share information with us?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. I guess the 80-degree weather yesterday and today is making me a little anxious about getting a swimming pool, so.
It'll be 40 and 5 inches of snow
Yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Councilman Ellis.
Nothing further, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilman Beatty.
Yeah, I just think it's nice to see everybody working together to try to come up with ideas to make things better. I think we've had a strong mayor and a good group of people and a good staff that really do see possibilities. And I think we all bring strengths to a discussion or aspects that, other people don't see. So I think it's something that's going to have to be done as a group session, to really get traction on it. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time and going to the blight meeting. And I think you learn more most of the time from other people that are doing it than you do from a speaker somewhere. The people that are actually have boots on the ground are the ones that usually have the best stories to tell. So thanks for your effort.
Thank you. Questions from the media, Bill?
Thank you. Could somebody give me the status report on the firefighters arbitration? Is there anything to report?
Nothing to update at this point.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Meeting is adjourned.